In their world, Holy Laplace is the creator, and when she departed, she gifted the people with special powers, which are skills. So, the sister urged the children to give thanks to Holy Laplace as they enjoyed their bounty that day. They all started eating, but one of the kids was not eating, which caught the attention of the sister in charge of them. She asked why he wasn't eating, and the boy replied that Holy Laplace was biased because the Holy Knights were endowed with powers while he was not, making him feel abandoned. The mother explained that during ancient times, when the Holy Knights guarded the people, there were no monsters or threats, and everyone was equal. However, the present world has changed, making the Holy Knights special. At that moment, one of the sisters in charge of the children informed the older sister that she had searched the whole building and couldn't find Sahara. She decided to search for her in town. Meanwhile, Sahara was still inside a container, facing a tough time at the hands of the man who had taken her. Just as she was losing hope, the man moved away from her, and at that time Fate entered the container, assuring her that she would be saved. He cut the chain by which she was tied, and just as they were about to leave, the man appeared. He warned Fate to go away and not interfere, but Fate was reluctant. He ran between the containers to protect the girl, and a real battle ensued. With the help of his sword, which instructed him to strike, he defeated the man. Fate demanded to know who sent the man, and the man eventually confessed that Hotovlurk had sent him to kidnap the girl. Following this, Fate took the girl to a place where they could get something to eat and then returned her home. Her sister, who had searched every nook and cranny of their land, was overjoyed that Sahara was back. Sahara thanked Fate, who was deeply moved, having never been appreciated in his life. He approached her and shared his father's advice to always find happiness, regardless of the situation. Though he didn't fully understand the words, he believed they had brought him to this moment and wished for her survival. Fate had acquired a new one-handed sword technique, and the greed sword congratulated him. Fate, curious, asked if it was something good, and the sword explained that with technical skills, he could access tech arts, like secret techniques, allowing him to attack twice in the same space. He realized he might have been in trouble without these techniques during the heroic rescue, and the sword left him to focus on the task at hand. The truth was that battles often came down to the luck of the moment, and there was no guarantee the stronger person would win. This made Fate wonder if he had simply been lucky this time, but he was determined to grow stronger to the point where he could win without relying on luck. The greed sword reminded him that the next day he would start working for the hearts, prompting Fate to realize he hadn't purchased any clothing for the occasion. The news of Sir Mason, who was struck down by a divine dragon in Gallia, was spreading rapidly. It was said that Lady Roxy would succeed him in the Hart family. In a bar, one man was particularly certain of this news, as one of his acquaintances had inside information. The bartender reminded him that Sir Mason was the one who had kept the Holy Knights from going out of control, but the man was confident that Lady Roxy was capable of maintaining order. The bartender suggested changing the topic, as he had never heard any good news about the Vlurk siblings, who were also part of the Holy Knights. Before closing, the man inquired about Fate, and the bartender informed him that Fate still dropped by after work every day. The next day, Fate ventured into the Holy Knights district, and he was astonished by the beauty and size of the place. As he marveled, Lady Roxy approached him, leaving him dumbfounded by her striking beauty. He found himself unable to speak or move until she called him back to reality. He expressed his appreciation for her beauty, which made her happy. She then took him to meet her father, who lay in a grave. Fate inquired about the situation, and she explained that her father had died 4 days earlier during an encounter with the divine dragon in Gallia. Gallia was a continent dominated by monsters, and one of the Holy Knights' major duties was to contain them. Roxy explained that the duty had fallen to the Hart family that year, a dangerous task that shouldn't have been deadly. However, a divine dragon, which hadn't left its lair for 1,000 years, had slain her father and his companions. Fate wondered why he hadn't known about all this despite her trials, but Roxy reassured him not to feel sad. As the new head of the House Hart, she encouraged him to work together to bring joy to the family. She extended her hand for a handshake, but just as he was about to shake her hand, he remembered that telepathy might be activated, so he quickly ignored the gesture. At that moment, Haru, the chief mate of the Hart estate, arrived. Roxy introduced Fate to Haru and suggested that he comport himself as befitting a servant of the Hart family. So, Fate resumed his work. It had already been a week since he started working there, and this caught the attention of Mr. Olivia, who asked him to take breaks sometimes. Mr. Minerva also supported the idea, but Fate insisted on completing his work first. At first, Mr. Olivia thought he was a bit eccentric, always talking to a sword. Mr. Minerva added that he even shook while eating meat. Fate explained that it had been 5 years since he had any meat and requested some time to rest. Meanwhile, Lady Roxy called for him through Miss Haru. As he walked towards where she was sitting, he couldn't understand why she had called him. However, when he reached her, his hunger overwhelmed him, causing him to lose focus. Despite her continuous calling, he couldn't hear her voice. When he finally regained his composure, he was surprised to hear Roxy call him Faye, which was the name his father used to call him. He voiced his surprise, and she inquired about his father. He explained that his father had died while hunting monsters, much like Roxy's own father. She told him that her mission was to make the house a peaceful and joyous place and assured him that he was part of their family. This touched him deeply, but he couldn't hold on any longer, and his eyes began to droop until he eventually fell asleep. Upon waking, Faith found himself in bed. He stood up and walked to a nearby table, where he discovered a letter from Lady Roxy, instructing him to rest for the day. Afterward, he approached the greedy sword and asked why he couldn't control himself earlier. The sword explained that once the gluttony skill tasted souls, there was no stopping it. He had been devoured by it, and it left him craving for more. However, the more he consumed, the stronger he became. Fate was destined to seek out souls to consume, and if he failed to do so, he'd either starve to death or lose control, attacking anyone in his path. He felt like a monster to himself. The sword offered a tip that when his hunger approached its limit, it would be visible in his eyes, changing the color of his eyeballs, signaling that there was no turning back. As he walked through the streets that night, he sensed the enticing scent of warriors. The sword explained that it might be because his hunger boost had kicked in. He wondered if that's what the red eyes meant, and the sword clarified that the hunger boost was a temporary power that enhanced the use of the gluttony skill. It gave him better night vision and the ability to track prey by scent, leaving weaker prey terrified and paralyzed. Upon reaching the fields, he noticed goblins standing in one place. To alleviate the situation, he charged at them and personally dispatched them. He no longer waited for monsters but actively sought them out to feed his gluttony. Suddenly, a rumble in the forest revealed a Goblin King. While Fate had the upper hand in stats, the Goblin King's advantage lay in its health regeneration, allowing it to keep fighting even when injured. He followed the sword's guidance, overcoming his initial shock as the Goblin King feasted on a human. The sword reminded him that humans were prime meals for goblins, urging him to regain his composure and strike. They engaged in a fierce struggle, and he fled when the battle grew too harsh. Greed called for him to have faith and continue the fight. With determination, he returned and defeated the Goblin King with a powerful stroke. His stats increased with the added bonus of health regeneration. Exhausted, Fate sat down, and Greed asked him to open his stats to level 1, requiring him to submit everything he had gained since they met. Despite feeling somewhat biased, Fate regarded the sword as his partner and promptly opened his stats. He watched as his power left him, his stats being absorbed, and eventually, Greed transformed into a bow-like form. The sword informed Fate that someone had been observing him for a while, and it was time to deal with them. Fate requested an arrow, and Greed instructed him to stretch the bow. The arrows would materialize. He could aim at anything he liked, even as a novice. Hey, this is getting interesting. A new weapon has now been discovered. Fate is moving fast with his task, but wait, what about his stats that have been given to the greedy sword? Stay tuned for the next episode. If you have not subscribed to our channel, subscribe now and click the notification to get updated. On this, what are your views? What do you think is going to happen? Let's see what you have in the comments section.